fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
How to become limitless. Hey everybody, Joe Simons, like diamonds, Salt Strong, Unchurched. This is a fascinating thing for me. How to become limitless. Who wouldn't want that, right? Well, my buddy, Captain Dylan Hubbard, he knows I love reading, and he had sent me over a text, and he's starting to really get into reading and really just becoming a better version of himself. And he said, Joe, you've got to read this book called Limitless. It's called Limitless, Upgrade Your Brain, Learn Anything Faster, and Unlock Your Exceptional Life by Jim Quick. Now, who wouldn't want that, right? And why I'm doing this on Unchurched is I believe God wants that for us, right? Just like we want our kids, right? If you have children, you want them to unlock an exceptional life. You want them to be happy. You want them limitless, right? You want them maximizing every possible gift that God gave them. And God wants that for us. He wants us to absolutely maximize our bodies, our brains, everything he gave us. And this book was very eye-opening in saying that most of us, if not like 98% of us, are not maximizing everything we got. It was really, really eye-opening. And I'm going to share with you just, some of the things on here that, just like had me like, whoa. And I'll just start off right off the bat. He talked about just reading, right? And obviously, reading is critical. And if you talk about looking at any successful person over the last few hundred years, so any successful person, people like, let's just take Ben Franklin or Einstein, Steve Jobs. People that most Americans would know who they are. Every one of them, like the one thing they had in common, none of them were born in the same month. None of them, came from wealthy families. There's no trends except for one big trend that every single one of these successful people, like over 100 people they studied that have all passed away. And the one thing they had in common was their love of reading and learning more, right? And it talks about in this book, and this is a big piece of it, why learning more via reading, that's one of the best ways to do it. And certainly it's one of the best ways to remember stuff. You remember more reading than even listening. Most people, if reading a physical book, even versus doing it on the audio version, you actually do retain more, according to this book and what the studies show. But that's one of the best ways to expand your brain, right? You're putting more input in there, which is kind of growing your brain and training your brain, just like working out, to memorize more stuff, to remember more stuff, and even to dump out some of the stuff that doesn't matter, that have now become habits and that we just know how to do them routinely. Really, really fascinating. This is one of the quickest ways to start growing your brain and becoming limitless, on your way to become limitless, is to read. And so I love reading, and I read pretty fast. And so there's a part in here, this shocked the heck out of me, that says, all right, in basically in 4 minutes, we're going to increase your reading speed by 30 to even 100%. I'm like, all right, I'm down. So it has you read 2 pages. Or I'm sorry, it happened to be 2 pages for me. It says read is just as fast as you normally would, and hit a stopwatch for 2 minutes. And so you do it, and then you count up all the words, so you're getting words per minute. And mine ended up being 2 full pages I was able to read in the 2 minutes with pretty small font. And it ended up being around or close to 400 words a minute is where I'm reading. And the average person's at 280, something like that. And so I'm a little bit above average, but not anything like, I think JFK, another person we all know, is a pretty sharp guy. He was avid reader, and that dude was closer to like 800 to 1,000 words per minute. So that means if it takes me 4 hours to read a book, it takes him 2. Think about what that does to your brain and how much you can actually remember, and how much, that's huge, right? And same with you. If you can read 500 words a minute and you're friend or your spouse is reading 250, I mean, you're doubling. I mean, that's a massive, massive difference, especially when you compound it over time. Anywho, we go back to this, little thing. So I got my number, right? Let's just say it's 400 on the dot. And then it says, all right, now we want you to take your finger. Remember old school, like when you were a little kid, they would have you take your finger and run it underneath every sentence you're reading. Now do that and try to read a different area, so you're not just rereading the same thing. Do another set of pages or page or whatever, how fast you read, and do it with your finger under it. So I did it that time, and mine went up to almost 600 words per minute when I took the finger. It was the high 500s. I was like, and I still retain the stuff, which is even wild. And so what it does is a couple of things. One, it keeps you focused. So now you're not getting distracted like so many of us do when we read. That finger is making you focus. It's the touch. So it's another form of action. So even the just you touching the paper and running it from side to side is now making something else in your brain work even harder to focus on what you're actually reading. Number two is you don't go back. A lot of people end up going back to things and rereading it when they really don't have to. As long as you're actually focused on the words, you usually have to go back and reread it, because when you lose focus and you start daydreaming or looking at your phone or stuff like that. But so that the forward motion of your finger going from left to right makes your brain focus on it, and it now makes it where your brain doesn't want to go back, and is actually capturing everything that you're reading. It was fascinating. So it did, and basically 4 minutes. It was each of these little things was 2 minutes each. In 4 minutes, I went from going from around 400 words a minute to almost 580, whatever, almost 600. It's crazy. And I've been trying it ever since, and it does work. Really, really, really wild. And so, I mean, that's one example, right? I've literally improved something about myself with one little hack like that. I thought that was just fascinating, and I'm on my way to becoming limitless. Another thing they talked about, just massive, was just the morning routine. And we've talked about this before, The Miracle Morning, must-read book if you haven't read it, where it talks about doing these routines. And this guy, this Jim Quick, I mean, he is the guy. I mean, celebrities hire him. People who are doing big speeches, presidents have hired him. Movie stars hire him constantly when they have movie stars who are like under the gun. Because think about that. It's not easy. We get to see a movie and they make it look all easy, but think about how many lines that person, that actor, had to memorize. You can say, oh, yeah, that's all they have to do all day. That's still tough. Most of us have trouble memorizing things. They're having to memorize that, and even memorize their co-actors' lines to make sure they know when they're supposed to speak, right? They don't just memorize their own. They're memorizing basically the entire manuscript. And so this guy, Jim Quick, is the guy that the biggest names in Hollywood go to when they need to memorize stuff fast, which goes down to being a faster reader, to memorizing more of it and keeping it. Really, really fascinating. The cool part is this Jim Quick, he actually got hurt. He had a brain injury at a young age. And oh man, I was like almost tears reading this story. I felt for this at the time young man. Now he's an adult, obviously, but he couldn't read. He couldn't remember anything. Like he when he was still 9, 10, 11, even when other kids were being able to read, a full book at age 11, he was having trouble even getting through a paragraph. And one of the teachers kind of labeled him as, yeah, that's the kid with the broken brain. And he overheard that, right? It talks about the importance of what we're saying to our kids, but he overheard that at a young age and it stuck with him. And so he just assumed for his whole life he was going to be stupid, that he was, can you imagine a teacher saying that and the kid hearing, she's like, yeah, that's the kid with the broken brain. He was just kind of destined for failure. And ended up discovering a lot of these things that I'm talking about, hey, how to become a reader, how to memorize stuff, how to use your brain. And basically, he had to rebuild his brain using all this stuff. And he's like, reading was the number one way to do it. So it goes back to the why we all should be reading. Most of us have stopped reading for whatever reason. We got old, we got burnt out in college, or just never enjoyed reading in the first place, or maybe just it takes too long. I would urge you to read this book called Limitless. One, I can't go through the whole thing, but oh my gosh, it was absolutely wild. But the morning routine, back to that, huge. And in terms of doing the things that I've always talked about, right? The meditation, writing what you're grateful for, doing a little bit of writing, doing a little bit of reading. If you recall from Miracle Morning, reading was a part of, if you just read for just 5-10 minutes every single day, you'd be shocked at what that does to your brain, what it does to your memory, what it does to you learning new things and coming up with better ideas. And it eventually becomes kind of addicting because you just want to keep reading more. He does some crazy stuff, like even he'll brush his teeth with the opposite hand. He'll switch hands up every other morning just to, once again, work on his brain, right? Because now if it's just always to say you're right-handed, if it's always your right hand, that's a habit, right? Your brain's memorized that. It's doing no work. It's not firing the neurons where he does left-handed. And I've done this even with my mouse on my computer, just going left-handed. It is wild. It starts lighting up another side of your brain, and it starts thinking, and it starts going into overdrive, if you will, which is a good thing, right? It's how you grow your brain. It's how you grow your mind. If you just did the same boring routines over and over again, you never did anything new, your brain would never expand. And in fact, it would start shrinking, according to this book, and kind of going in atrophy, and it's not a good thing. So I thought that was really interesting. Does even just he says a 3-minute workout. That was part of the Miracle Morning, was to do up to 10 minutes. He's like, even just doing 3 minutes of push-ups and sit-ups, just something to get the body going. He's like, it is amazing what that morning routine would do. And then calming the busy mind, right? That was a huge piece of it. He never really talked about certain types of meditation. Now, we talked about that on the podcast, or that he never even said I went for 60 minutes, but just, it's almost more of like something he's doing all the time is slow breathing and just fully being concentrated on what you're doing. And another massive part of it was being present. I've been trying this year ever since I finished this book with my kids and coworkers. A lot of times, I'll be honest, I have other things on my mind, and I'm almost like trying to like hurry up and get through this conversation so I can get back to what I want to do. And I've been shutting that part out and just being laser focused. And I've had some of the best conversations. I've retained more of what they're saying. And I can see how this helps everything around me, right? You got people who are lit up and fired up talking to you and excited because you could tell when someone's present or when someone's kind of like checking their phone or distracted or looking around you. It is a whole different level to be laser focused in, and someone is just staring in your eyes and taking in everything, asking questions. And that helps you actually become more limitless. It's not being distracted in a million different things and trying to multitask. Speaking of that, it says multitasking is one of the absolute worst things that you can do. Get rid of it. Like your at any given millisecond, your brain can only focus on one thing. Why not have it focus on one thing and do it really well for multiple milliseconds or minutes, right? I'm being sarcastic there, versus just having it split up so many different ways. You're literally losing momentum and you're losing your focus. And it says it takes you so much longer. You think you're being productive and you're almost kind of worn out because your brain is literally worn out bouncing from thing to thing when you're multitasking, but it is one of the worst things you could do. And it is the opposite of becoming limitless. You're limiting yourself because your brain can only do so much. It can only pivot so many times, do things really well, where your brain starts basically going into like optimum mode, just like a vehicle or anything would at a certain speed. It kind of finds that optimal mode, like on cruise control, versus just the opposite is like accelerating as fast as you can and then slamming on the brakes, then accelerating again. It's that wears anything out. And that's what your brain is doing every time you're just going from one to another and trying to refocus and have your brain now completely realigned to something else. So a big part of this was just about concentration and being 100% present. Let's see, I had a couple other pages that on the reading part, because that really was one of the biggest ahas, is you have to be a reader. Like I said, the most successful and well-known people in our history of the entire country and even the world were all readers. That's how they expanded their mind. That's how even Steve Jobs, he says, I got so many of my ideas from reading books. I've been listening to this podcast called Founders, where they talk about everyone from George Washington to Steve Jobs to Walt Disney. All the big names that we know who they are, most America does, and every one of them were just absolutely avid readers. Really, really fascinating, and every one of them would take away time. In some cases, like Bill Gates. He would, every year, that was one of his things. He'd take 7 to 10 days off and just go up to a mountain cabin by himself, and all he would do is read. And he would read at least a book a day, right? So he'd come back with 10 more books read, and he would have at least one big idea from each one, saying, all right, here's something we're going to implement. He would give it to his team, and they would implement the thing. On that speed reading thing, a misconception, it says a lot of people think, they're not comprehending anything, right? They're not actually bringing anything. But I can tell you, from even doing that finger thing, I feel like I'm remembering more of it then I just try to read a little bit faster and saying each word in my head. By doing the finger thing, I feel like I'm remembering a whole lot more of what I read. It's so fascinating. On the memorization thing, this was another wild one, and it's putting some type of association with something you already know. And the more you can do it in like a story form. And so he gave an example, like he was up on stage and he would tell the crowd, all right, I want you guys to tell me 30 random things. Like they need to be word like paperclip, toothbrush, toothpaste, throw 30 different names up at me one at a time. And you could tell he kind of takes it slow, and they're not written down. He'll have someone in the audience write them down, but he can't see them. There's nowhere for him to be seen. And then he'll close his eyes and he'll repeat every one of them in the same order that they were given to him. And he goes, I've gone up to 100 before. It just takes a while, but he's like 30 to 50 all day long. It's really tough. Like in this book, they gave just 10 words, right? Just 10. Let me see if I can go find it. It was so wild. I'll go and I'll find this sucker. But they gave 10 words and it gave you a couple minutes to try to memorize them and then say them back. And I tried to do it. I could maybe get 6 if I was lucky. It is not that easy to get these different words. And so what he's doing, here it is. So I'll just tell you what the words are. So it was fire hydrant, balloon, battery, barrel, board, diamond, night, ox, toothpaste, sign. And now I'll try to repeat those back to me in the order. And most of you can't. I'd be shocked if anyone could. You might remember diamond, like Simon's like diamonds. You usually remember the first one and like the last one. There's that recency and that piece of it. But most people end up missing 3 or 4 or 5 of them, just because it's tough to. Once again, we haven't been pushing our brains to memorize stuff and remember things quickly. And so what he does is he puts things like that into a story. So when people are throwing out these words to him, he's putting them into a story. And he did that. I'm not going to bore you with the whole details of it, but he put those same 10 words into a story. And then I read the story, and now he says, how many can you remember? And I got all 10 of them. I did this to my daughter, and she got the entire thing. And actually, I'm just going to take it because it was really fascinating. So here's the story with all those same words. Remember, fire hydrant, balloon, battery, barrel, board, diamond, night, ox, toothpaste, sign. I did this many days ago. I still remember this story. So now imagine you're standing next to a giant fire hydrant, the biggest one you've ever seen, this massive fire hydrant. And now attach a bunch of balloons on top of the fire hydrant. There's so many balloons that it takes the fire hydrant out of the ground so it floats up high in the sky. And then suddenly it is hit with a load of batteries and explodes. The batteries are being launched into the sky in large barrels, and the barrels are being thrown up with a wooden board, like a seesaw. And the board is being balanced by a large diamond, a big, brilliant, sparkling stone that's balancing this board. And then a knight in shining armor takes the diamond and he runs away. But he's quickly stopped by an ox. And the only way to get through the ox is to brush the teeth of the ox with toothpaste. The ox moves aside and reveals a big neon sign with the words, "Congratulations." Now, how many of you can remember of that story, right? Remember, we got the fire hydrant going with these big balloons, and then it gets knocked out with the batteries and explodes, and the batteries are being launched up by these barrels, and the barrels are being thrown up by a wooden board that's acting like a seesaw, and the seesaw thing has been balanced by a big sparkling diamond. A knight in shining armor comes, but is stopped by an ox. And the only way he can get through the ox is to brush it with toothpaste. And the ox moves aside and reveals a big sign with the word "Congratulations." That's all 10 words in that little story. Isn't that wild? So what he says is the reason we've been telling stories for forever. It's the reason even our parents and school teachers, they teach us things like the ABC song. When the song, anytime we could have song or some type of story associated with it, we end up remembering it better. And so when people are throwing those 30 to 100 words at him, he's literally telling his own make-believe story, like that one that doesn't even make sense, right? Obviously, it's a very, very fictional story, but that's what he does anytime he's getting words, and that's how he remembers stuff. And it flat out works. Like I said, I couldn't a million years, maybe I could remember Diamond just because my last name. But if someone had asked me, "Hey, do you remember those 10 words?" 5 days later, I never would remember it. But I remember almost all of that story, even days later, even after just reading it the very first time. Fascinating stuff. So anyhow, I just wanted to talk about this book, Limitless. I do believe God has called us to make the most of what we got. And the brain is it, right? I mean, that's where ideas come from, right? I mean, that's where everything we have comes from. That's how every invention has come from. That's how we improve our lives, is using our brain. And such a big part of this was reading. So we're here towards the end of the year. You know what I think about New Year's resolutions? They kind of stink because most of us don't do anything with it. But here's your chance to have one that can make a massive impact on you in becoming limitless, learning things faster, and unlocking an exceptional life, which is the promise of this book. So Limitless is the book. You don't even need it if I gave you the highlights. The biggest part of it is you got to start reading. You got to start expanding your brain in many ways as you can if you want to be limitless. I believe we're called to do it. One of my big things is to read a whole lot more. Even if that means, taking some more breaks or, less TV, things that I know when I used to do a book a week, that was my goal. And I did it for years. And that was, really the foundation of that book, Fishing for Happiness, is all the different books I read. And I cut out TV was really the only thing I did. And I made a conscious decision just to start every morning, like he talks about, kind of the morning ritual, reading a little bit, even if it's just 10, 15 minutes. You'd be shocked at how many books you can read if you just do that, and then read a little bit more on the weekends and in times where you might normally sit in front of a TV and watch a game. And sometimes I would even have a game on, but I would have it just on mute and I would just be reading. And every 15, 10 minutes, I'd take a break. And man, you could read a whole book in a weekend just doing that. If that's something you love doing in front of a TV, even if you're in hunting right now or something, take a book. I know people who do that in the tree stand, and they're just kind of reading and waiting for any kind of sign of life. Or hearing deer, obviously, you still need to look up and make sure that you don't you're not missing out on an opportunity. But there's so many places and times that we could be reading. A lot of us have commutes. Even though I said that it sounds like reading a physical book is the best, but the next best is audio. You still retain a ton of it. And it drives me crazy. I've got people that I really love, and they spend hours in the car, hours, sometimes hour plus a day. They're just traveling a lot and have a big territory, and they don't do any of this stuff. They're just listening to music. I'm like, man, what a waste. You could literally be expanding your mind, learning so many new things. So I would urge you to do that, make that a part of the New Year's resolution. I think you'll be shocked at what it does. And I'm one step closer to being limitless. So guys, I love you. Hopefully that was helpful. I thought this was just fascinating. Try the whole thing with your finger, basically just like old school, growing up as a kid, where the teacher makes you put your finger where you're reading word for word, but you're just going to be doing it faster. You'll be shocked at how much you remember and how fast you can get through stuff. So I'll talk to you on the next episode.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul, it was pain.